The Bennett mansion stood tall on the edge of the city, surrounded by silver gates and long pine trees that whispered with the cold wind. It was a place that never smiled, always quiet, always neat, like its owner, Ethan Bennett. People said he was a man made of ice, that no emotion could touch him, and no one ever saw him laugh or cry. The staff spoke softly when he passed and walked quickly down the halls when they heard his footsteps. He was rich, powerful, and distant. Among the people who worked for him was Amelia, a maid who had joined the mansion only a few months earlier. She was a simple woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. Her world revolved around her little daughter, Lila, a 7-year-old girl who had been blind since birth. Lila didn't see light, but she saw life in a way that most people didn't. She could recognize her mother's footsteps by sound, feel warmth in people's words, and smile even when life seemed unfair. Amelia worked hard every day, cleaning rooms that never got dusty, polishing floors that already shined, and washing dishes that were used only by the staff. She often wished she could give Lila a better life, but the mansion job was all she had. Ethan didn't know much about her except that she did her work quietly and never caused trouble. That was all he cared about. One winter evening, as the sky turned pale and snow began to fall softly outside, Amelia finished her chores earlier than usual. Most of the staff had already left and the house was silent. The only light came from the large chandelier hanging in the middle of the main hall. Lila was sitting nearby, humming a small tune to herself. The little girl often waited for her mother in that spot because she loved the echo of her voice in the marble hall. Amelia smiled when she saw her, set her broom aside, and walked over. "Mama, can we dance?" Lila asked, lifting her small hands toward the sound of her mother's steps. Amelia hesitated. She knew dancing in the main hall wasn't allowed, but something inside her wanted to say yes. The house was empty, and for once she wanted her daughter to feel free. So she turned on the small old radio she kept in her apron pocket. The tune that came out was soft and slow, an old song Amelia's mother used to hum when she was young. Amelia took Lila's hands, guided her gently, and began to move in small circles. Lila giggled, her feet sliding carefully across the cold floor. She couldn't see the grand chandelier above or the portraits on the walls, but she could feel joy in the rhythm. Her hair bounced as she spun, and her laughter filled the hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time that week, Amelia forgot she was a maid. She forgot her tired hands and her long hours. She was just a mother, dancing with her little girl. They moved slowly, then faster, spinning together under the golden light. Amelia's eyes shined with tears she didn't want to show. It wasn't sadness, it was love, deep and pure, the kind that made her forget the world around her. But then the front door opened. The sound echoed like thunder in the quiet mansion. Amelia froze. The wind rushed in, carrying flakes of snow. And there he was, Ethan Bennett, tall, serious, dressed in his long black coat. His expression was unreadable. The cold air followed him as he stepped inside. Amelia's heart began to race. She quickly stopped dancing, pulled her daughter close, and whispered, "Lila, stop, please." The radio kept playing softly, the tune still floating through the air. Ethan's sharp eyes moved from the radio to the two figures on the floor, the maid and her blind child holding each other. For a long moment he said nothing. Amelia tried to speak, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, sir. We didn't mean—" "Continue," he said quietly. Amelia looked up, confused. "Sir?" "I said continue," Ethan repeated, his voice calm but firm. Amelia couldn't believe what she heard. She thought he was mocking her. No one ever heard him speak kindly, yet his face showed no anger, only something softer, something she couldn't name. Lila, unaware of what was happening, smiled toward the voice she heard. "Who's there, Mama?" she whispered. Amelia hesitated. "It's Mr. Bennett, sweetheart." Lila turned her head toward Ethan's voice. "Hello, Mr. Bennett," she said sweetly. "Do you like music?" Ethan didn't know what to say. It had been years since anyone asked him something so innocent. He looked at her tiny hands holding her mother's, her blind eyes full of life. His throat felt tight, but he didn't show it. He simply nodded, though she couldn't see him, and said, "Yes, I used to." Lila giggled softly. "Then you should dance too." For a second, Ethan's cold mask cracked. Amelia held her breath, unsure if her daughter had just made a mistake. But instead of anger, Ethan looked away, his expression distant. Without another word, he turned and walked upstairs. The door closed behind him, and the sound of his shoes faded down the corridor. Amelia stood frozen for a moment, holding her daughter close. Then she knelt down and whispered, "You mustn't say things like that, my love. Mr. Bennet doesn't dance." "Why not?" Lila asked softly. Amelia smiled faintly. "Because some people forget how." The rest of the night passed quietly. Amelia finished her work and went home to the small apartment behind the mansion where the staff lived. But her mind kept returning to the moment Ethan said that single word. "Continue." It didn't sound like an order. It sounded almost like a memory. The next morning, Amelia expected the worst. She thought she would be called into the office and fired. Her hands trembled as she put on her uniform. When she entered the main hall, she stopped in surprise. There were several large boxes sitting near the staircase. She looked at the labels: Braille books, music sets, a small heater, warm clothes for a child. The name on the order form said from E. Bennett. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked around, but Ethan was nowhere in sight. From that day, something quietly changed in the mansion. Ethan started coming home earlier. He never spoke much, but he always seemed to linger near the hall when Lila's voice filled it. Sometimes when Amelia played the radio, he would stand silently in the doorway, listening. The once cold air of the house started to feel a little warmer. One afternoon, Lila was sitting on the porch steps, humming as she felt the sunlight on her face. Ethan passed by, talking to his driver. Lila turned toward his footsteps and said, "Mr. Bennet, it's a nice day, isn't it?" He paused. No one in years had spoken to him like that. Not expecting anything, not afraid, just speaking kindly. "Yes," he said softly. "It is. Do you work a lot?" she asked curiously. Ethan almost smiled. "Too much, I think. Then you should rest sometimes. Mama says music helps people rest." Her words stayed with him long after he left. That evening, he found himself walking into a music store downtown for the first time in decades. The clerk recognized him immediately, nervous under his sharp gaze. Ethan said simply, "I need something for a child who can't see but loves to listen." When the clerk offered him a small wooden music box that played a soft lullaby, Ethan nodded. The next morning, Amelia found it on Lila's bed. It had no note, only a tag that said, "For Lila." The little girl kept it close everywhere she went. Every time it played, she would hum along, and Ethan would hear it echo faintly through the halls. Sometimes he would stop what he was doing just to listen. As days turned into weeks, the mansion began to feel different. The walls that had once felt empty started to hold laughter again. The cold billionaire who had once cared only for numbers found himself pausing at the sound of a little girl's joy. He didn't know why he cared, but he couldn't help it. Something about her light, her innocence, reminded him of something, or someone, he had lost long ago. One night, Amelia found him standing by the piano room, looking at a dusty old photograph of his late wife and daughter. She didn't say anything, but in that silence she understood everything. He wasn't cold by nature, he was broken by loss. And somehow her blind daughter's small voice had found a way into the part of his heart he thought was dead. That night, Ethan looked down at the photo again and whispered, "You would have liked her too." The next morning, he ordered something new to be installed in the mansion, a soft sound system in the main hall. When Amelia asked about it, the manager said, "Mr. Bennet said the place should have music again." That evening, Amelia and Lila walked into the hall as the gentle notes of a piano filled the air. Lila clapped her hands with joy. "Mama, it's beautiful." "It sounds like the stars are singing." Ethan stood quietly on the upper balcony, watching. For the first time in years, his eyes softened, not because of pity, but because of peace. He didn't speak, and they didn't know he was there. But deep down, he knew that moment mattered more than any business deal he had ever made, because that night the mansion wasn't cold anymore. It had music, laughter, and something he thought he would never have again: warmth. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly turned into months. The Bennet mansion, once filled with silence and cold air, had changed in ways no one could explain. The staff moved more freely now. The air carried the soft sound of music or laughter, and the cold billionaire who had once walked through his halls without emotion now stayed longer, listening from a distance. Ethan Bennet had never spoken much, but his silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was thoughtful. Lila's laughter had become the heart of that great house. She had learned to find her way around by sound. Her cane tapped softly on the floor as she counted her steps, and she always knew exactly where her favorite piano room was. Ethan had made sure it was open every day for her. A teacher visited twice a week, quietly paid by Ethan himself. The teacher would come early in the morning, bringing gentle tunes and new melodies for Lila to learn. Amelia noticed it all. She didn't speak of it, but she felt deep gratitude in her heart. She saw the way Ethan would stop near the door, pretending to read something while secretly listening to Lila's lessons. Once, Lila had made a small mistake and laughed at herself. Ethan had smiled from the corner, and Amelia saw it. The first real smile she had ever seen on his face. It was faint but honest. One afternoon, Amelia was polishing the windows when she heard Lila calling from the piano room. "Mama, come listen. I can play the whole song now." Amelia rushed in, wiping her hands on her apron. Lila's small fingers pressed the keys carefully. The melody was shaky but sweet, full of effort and heart. When she finished, she turned her face up proudly. "Did I do it right?" she asked. Amelia knelt beside her and hugged her tightly. "You did perfect, my love," she whispered. She didn't notice Ethan standing behind them, watching quietly. He didn't want to interrupt. He only stood there for a while before walking away, his eyes softer than usual. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked through his empty study, thinking about the sound of that song. It had been years since he felt peace like that. He sat by the fireplace and looked at an old photo of his late wife and their little girl. They were smiling. It was taken before the accident that had changed everything. He hadn't allowed music in the house since that day. But now somehow this small blind child had brought it back without even trying. The next morning, Ethan called his assistant. "Find out if there are any schools or charities for blind children in this city," he said in his usual firm tone. "And I want information by today." The assistant didn't ask questions. He had never heard his boss mention children before, but he knew better than to question him. That evening, Ethan sat with papers spread out across his desk. He read about schools that needed support, children who couldn't afford books or music lessons. By midnight, he had already signed a donation form under a new foundation name, the Lila Hope Trust. He didn't tell Amelia about it. He wanted it to be a surprise. The next few weeks were beautiful. Lila's confidence grew with every song she learned. She played whenever she could, after breakfast, during cleaning hours, before bed. The mansion was alive again. Even the staff had changed. The cook sometimes hummed in the kitchen. The gardener brought flowers inside. Life had color once more, but not everyone saw it kindly. Some workers began to whisper behind Amelia's back. "She's using her daughter to get close to the boss," one said. "No maid gets this kind of attention," another muttered. Amelia heard the whispers but stayed silent. She didn't care what they thought. She only cared that her child was happy. Still, deep down, she feared one day Ethan might hear those words and misunderstand. One afternoon, she found Ethan sitting in the main hall, something he rarely did. He looked lost in thought, staring at the large window. Amelia hesitated before speaking. "Sir," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Lila. You've changed her world." Ethan turned toward her. His face was calm but serious. "She changed mine first," he said quietly. Then he stood up and added, "Tell her I want her to play something tomorrow evening. I'm inviting a few guests." Amelia blinked in surprise. "Guests, sir?" "Yes," Ethan said. "It's time this house heard real music again." The next day was busy. Workers decorated the main hall with soft lights and flowers. A grand piano was polished until it shone like glass. Amelia dressed Lila in a simple white dress with a ribbon around her waist. "You look like an angel," she said with tears in her eyes. Lila smiled shyly and asked, "Is Mr. Bennett coming to listen?" Amelia nodded. "He will be right there." When evening came, several cars arrived at the mansion. Business partners, charity leaders, and even a few reporters walked in. Ethan stood near the stage, looking nervous in a way no one had ever seen before. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or meetings. He was thinking about a little girl and her song. As the hall filled with soft chatter, Lila stepped forward, guided by Amelia's hand. The lights dimmed. She sat at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly. Ethan stood at the back, watching her with quiet pride. When the first note rang out, the room fell silent. The melody was gentle and pure. Lila played with emotion far beyond her age. Every sound carried warmth. Every note told a story of kindness, loss, and hope reborn. People listened in awe, unable to believe that a blind child was playing so beautifully. Amelia stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly, praying her daughter would feel the love around her. When the song ended, the hall erupted in applause. Lila smiled toward the sound, her face glowing. "Did I do well, Mama?" she asked. Amelia ran up, hugged her, and whispered, "You were perfect." Then Ethan walked to the stage, his steps steady but his heart racing. The guests watched as the billionaire took the microphone. His voice was calm but carried deep emotion. "This young girl," he began, "reminded me that we don't need eyes to see what truly matters. We just need heart." He looked at Lila. "She taught me to see again." The audience went silent. Even the most serious men in suits had tears in their eyes. Amelia wiped her cheeks quietly. Lila tilted her head and asked softly, "Mr. Bennett, are you happy now?" Ethan knelt beside her, smiling for the first time in front of everyone. "Yes, Lila," he said gently. "Thanks to you, I am." The guests clapped again, not for the wealth or the speech, but for the warmth in that simple moment. After the event, Ethan announced that all the money raised from the evening would go to help children with visual disabilities. He named the charity after Lila, shocking everyone in the room. Amelia was speechless. She could only whisper, "Thank you, sir," as tears rolled down her face. Over the following months, the Lila Hope Trust grew beyond the mansion's walls. Schools received instruments, books in Braille, and proper teachers. Ethan visited some of them quietly, away from cameras. He would watch children learning music, smiling softly when they laughed. Lila continued her piano lessons, getting better each day. Sometimes Ethan would join her, pressing a few keys with her to create small duets. Their friendship grew into something deeper, a bond built not on wealth or charity but on shared kindness. One snowy morning, Amelia found a small envelope on her bedside table. Inside was a letter in Ethan's handwriting. It said, "Amelia, I'm leaving for a short time to set up our foundation branch in another city. I want you and Lila to take care of this house until I return. It belongs to both of you now as much as it does to me." Amelia's hands trembled. She had never received such trust in her life. She went to Lila, who smiled when she heard the news. "That means he'll come back soon," Lila said happily. "We can play him a new song when he returns." Months later, Ethan did return. His hair had turned a little grayer, but his smile came faster now. The mansion staff welcomed him warmly. That night, as the snow fell outside, Lila played his favorite tune. Ethan listened quietly, then walked to her and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You've grown, Lila," he said softly. "And so have I." Amelia stood behind them, tears shining in her eyes. She thought of how everything had started, with one small dance in an empty hall. Back then, she was just a maid afraid of losing her job, and he was a cold man who had lost his heart to grief. But a little girl with no sight had seen something that neither of them could, the goodness still hidden inside him. As the night ended, Ethan looked out the window at the falling snow and said quietly, "You two gave this house back its soul." Lila smiled and reached for his hand. "No, Mr. Bennett," she said softly. "You just learned to see again." The fire crackled warmly as they stood together, not as Billionaire and Maid, but as something closer to family, three people who had healed one another without even meaning to. And in the distance, the old radio played that same tune that had started it all, filling the house with music, love, and peace once more.